You were good? Okay, everyone can hear me? Okay. I suppose after the number of dramas on my en route to Sydney, this should probably not be that big. Well, I'm really sorry, first of all, that I'm not there in person, even though I have arrived in Sydney to be doing this in person. But long live Zoom. I'll just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that everyone has dialed in from, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people in the virtual room and in the room there. Who wherever you are at St. Bernadette's Parish Hall. I think as a refugee, as someone who has settled on this land, it's incredibly important for me to acknowledge that and to have that reality of what Australia was like, or what it is like, and the injustices committed towards the First Nations people. Have that reminded on a daily basis, because I come from a community who's very familiar with the pain of dispossession and discrimination and injustices in a systemic level. As Jenny said, I arrived in Australia as a refugee myself when I was 15 years old, and essentially the only one who spoke English in the family, and have gone through a whole various stages of growing up to be the parent of the family at a very young age in a different country. Because I've, seen my mum and dad's life work, their education, their experiences all reduced to the fact that they could not communicate properly in English. But ever since I have come to Australia and I have made it my home, I have seen two different kinds of Australia, or two kinds of Australians: the ones who I'm surrounded by on a daily basis in my social and my professional circles, who are incredibly kind, and very different to the other half who buy into the anti-refugee narratives. And what that's made me realize all these years later, and having worked in the refugee advocacy space for quite a few years, I feel like I don't even know when I became a refugee advocate. It's a bit of a choice that you don't really get. I've realized that if we want an Australia that has compassion for refugees across the policy spectrum, then we need to have everyday Australians to be engaged as possible, and really have skin in the game. It's sort of what Craig was talking about earlier, and that I'm so bummed that I missed the first half of that conversation, because it sounded so good when I came in. It's having community invested in the future of refugee policy, and having that known to policy makers, to decision makers, that there's a lot, or there are very high stakes here. Taking community refugee sponsorship as an example, it is a way, as Craig and Leanne mentioned earlier as well, it has turned out to be that positive example of community coming together and doing something, and demonstrating that power in community, that we can do something. And despite the challenges of the policy, or despite the bureaucratic challenges, and has demonstrated that to the government, and it started a movement. It's the beginning of a movement in Australia, but it is a movement nonetheless. Thinking of the birthplace of community sponsorship, Canada, for example, has welcomed more than 325,000 refugees through sponsorship, and in addition to the government's resettlement program over there. It's very hard for Canada to make drastic changes in their policy or asylum space, because the numbers say that more than 2 million Canadians have been directly involved in sponsoring refugees since the program began for about 40 years ago. Or there are 9 million Canadians who have had some kind of indirect engagement with the program. the sponsorship program is actually considered a primary way for refugees to access resettlement in Canada. So you take that and you, in contrast, you look at the US when Donald Trump was president, and the record slashing of the refugee program that he was able to achieve. I think he managed to slash the refugee numbers, or the refugee admission numbers in the US every year since he became a president in 2016, or since he took office in 2017, really. That came down to about 15,000 only in 2020 to 2021, down from well over 100,000 places. And that is because the general public is largely removed from policy discussions. They are largely, they don't have a lot invested in it. And Craig and Leanne mentioned earlier, media plays a huge role in that space too. So when we look at Australia in comparison, refugees, or the refugee and asylum policies over the last 2 decades have become a political football without any significant backlash from the community, apart from the usual suspects, right? When Craig was talking earlier about the fact that it's not about changing the mind of the person who is on the opposite end of the spectrum, who has the opposite, the extreme view on the other end, because that's not going to happen. It's about shifting the dial in the middle ground. And that's what's happening with this community-led support, community sponsorship, or some of the work that we've been doing on the side as well, that, you know, the more everyday Australians are engaged in this space, the more everyday Australians are able to connect with refugees and people seeking asylum in a real and human way. Like, you know, when they see them as one of themselves, the harder it is for policymakers to ignore it, really, or to be making any drastic changes without facing significant repercussions or a lot of questioning from the government, from the community. The general public, who mostly have had no connections with refugee communities or with a refugee, or are it's a lot easier for them to buy into the narrative that the government of the day or the media sells, without really looking into things, without analysing things from a deeper lens. So the more the community, everyday members of the community are involved in the space, the more stories we're able to share, you know, and diverse stories as well. Unfortunately, a lot of the stories in this space are very, very devastating. You know, they're stories of incredible pain and challenges that refugees have had to handle, or have been faced with, or have been put through those situations. But there is also the other end that, you know, if we want to shift the dial, then some positive stories need to come out too. And I'm always very mindful of that balance. You know, that's not erasing the stories of pain and trauma, but it's making sure that that doesn't become the only narrative, because then it becomes very easy for the general member of the community to switch off, because it becomes something that they cannot relate to. One of the points mentioned earlier was around having trust in our elected leaders, and trusting that they will respond to this, and that's true. You know, they're elected, and they're in the parliament, or they're making policy for a reason. But in this space, I feel like our political leaders aren't going to do a lot of the getting out there, being on the forefront and leading. Unfortunately, it's going to be more the community coming together and leading the way, and having the political leaders follow on that path. It's because going back to that point of stories and real and human connections, when people at a grassroots level go meet their local MPs, or we have stories in the media about people who know other people in the positions that the policy change would impact, then it becomes a lot harder to turn a blind eye to what's happening at the policy level. The example I think Craig used was the same-sex marriage bill, or I think there was a specific sentence that he used, that I know someone in that position, and knowing someone in that position will change perspectives. And that's, it's taken me years to come to a realization that the Australia that I came to as a 15-year-old refugee, and how I always thought it was impossible for that Australia to be so anti-refugee or have such harsh policies or sentiments towards refugees, is because the people who I was surrounded by were in contact, and they were connected with people like me and my family. And of course, they were never going to think that, someone like us was the perpetrator that the mainstream media sells, essentially. So it's about making sure that we have more and more of those stories, and more and more about the positive impact, not just for refugees coming into Australia, integrating and enjoying fair laws and policies, but also the positive impact in the community, the way it's uplifting the community and giving the community something very practical and a meaningful channel to engage in this space, and start shifting the dial and hopefully get to that tipping point. And this is going to be a critical year, I think, in the refugee policy sphere, with the election coming up, and there's a lot at stake, but I'm really hopeful that it's going towards more positive outcomes. I'll talk quickly a little bit about the work that we've been doing, but I won't take too much of the time, because I think for those who are in the room in person, my colleague Nicole is there, who you can bombard with questions afterwards about how you can get involved in some of our work. I believe she's got some flyers there as well, and for those in the virtual room, I will add some links in the chat too. But the fact that some of the work that we've been doing and the work that has been happening in this space, in terms of community coming together and demonstrating that we have the capacity to be taking in more refugees, to be giving a successful settlement experience to more people, and to grant a safe haven to more people. That's starting to shift the dial a little bit at a policy level too. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, despite the international borders being shut in December last year, the government did announce a pilot sponsorship program in partnership with us at CRESA. And that's testament to that pressure or that work that the community has put in through, leading to positive policy developments. Now, it's not everything we had asked for. It's not it doesn't check all the boxes, but it's a start. And hopefully we can, get on that journey and have it uphill as fast as possible. I do have a couple of slides to share about our program. I'm not sure if we have the time for that, Jenny. Is that possible? I also have very terrible internet here in the hotel.
Go ahead if you'd like to try.
Okay, let me have a go.
And whilst Shabnam's doing that, perhaps we can just remind people who are in the virtual room to put their questions in the chat, and we'll come to questions in the room if there's any as well. So just to go ahead with that. Are you okay, Shabnam?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah. Okay, I did have a video to show you all earlier. Sorry, I'm a little...
Community sponsorship of refugees is a groundbreaking approach to helping refugees find safety. This approach brings small groups of local citizens together to welcome and support newcomers in their communities.
My life before coming to Australia was being a refugee for 5 years in Malaysia. Coming to Australia was my beginning of life.
If we can do something better in such a rich country as Australia to help people that are just looking for a safe place to live, I want in.
I come from a family which came to Australia as refugees. It was my grandparents, so I've always felt connection and I guess a responsibility to that.
We felt really committed to sharing the resources and the networks that we have.
Canada's program has run successfully for decades, but now thousands of people in a growing number of countries around the world are getting involved, with Australians stepping up to do their bit.
We were able to give them both computers, laptops through a school that was getting rid of their laptops, which was wonderful.
I really enjoy meeting people from other cultures. I gain a lot from it.
We'll be able to get people settled here, so that's obviously the aim of the exercise.
This approach is not only a way to help refugees reach safety in Australia, but also help newcomers flourish in their new communities. Sponsor groups help refugees find employment, succeed in their education, learn English, navigate essential services, and find friendship. Oh, and explain that huntsman spiders are harmless, but magpies are dangerous.
Before I come Ararat, I don't have a license. Paul, every day, he's give me license. That's why now I have a license. Life is very easy, alhamdulillah.
The best part really is getting to know people. I mean, the resilience that people have that have had to get out of war-torn countries and settle into another place is just so admirable.
There are preparations that need to be made to make this all happen, but the end result is very natural and instinctive. Members of the community helping one another in practical day-to-day ways.
Just being there as a friend and advisor, because, they don't know how things are set up here.
Well, we've now settled 2 families and, as I've said, totally furnished 2 houses.
It's quite an easy thing to do because, I speak the language, I know the culture, but it means so much to them because they don't. I was their first mate, so I was able to help them.
Ni kitu kizuri na mimi nimependa kutoka nyumbani kuja hapa kusherehekea kwa pamoja. Hata ile kukaa na kuwa na mawazo linapunguka.
Community sponsorship can not only help people find their feet quickly in their new communities, it can also provide a way for smaller regional cities and towns to welcome refugees.
We have fun with Eileen, we have fun with each other, the kids have fun. I think we're just a good crew. And the dog. And the dog.
One beautiful moment was they rang me and said, would you be godmother to the little daughter? And that was really an honour.
Friendship overcomes a lot of barriers.
Very rewarding to see people gradually become more independent from us.
Yeah, very rewarding, like I said, I'm coming out of after the test, coming out of the Vic roads and holding up his licence.
And then he got out of the car and he saw me and he danced all the way over. And he said, oh, I'm so happy to see you.
The very best part is their coffee.
For me, the best part is to interact with the kids. You can see in them how much this country can offer them, how their horizons have broadened all of a sudden by just being here.
It's been probably one of the best things I've ever done.
It's been an excellent experience in working together.
Being with them, they helped me to get a job that is my dream job, being in a crew and in the film industry, and I'm so glad with that.
I think it's been wonderful because we've all stepped into probably our skill set too of where we could give the support.
It's going to have to be people power that makes a difference. They've got initiative, they're just wonderful people that if you can get involved with them, it's only going to benefit you. It's going to benefit the country long term.
They feel accepted by us and respected and valued. All those really good things that people want.
A lot of Australians have never met a refugee, so this is an opportunity to help and to meet them and to get that rewarding interaction. When you do those things, it is viral, I believe, and I think that the more kindness you show people, the more that they will carry that forward.
So I would strongly recommend neighbourhood groups get together and look after, support newly arrived refugee to Australia. It's incredibly rewarding.
Ni mzuri na nafurahi kwa kuwa amenisapoti, tuko pamoja, tuendelee kwa pamoja. Okay.
If you've ever felt like you wanted to do something practical and meaningful to help address the global refugee situation, consider getting involved. Visit refugeesponsorship.org.au.
Okay, and then I've got a couple of very quick slides to go through with you, just in case you're interested in that program, but I think it's quite quite obvious the power the community has had in coming together. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. Sorry, I'll just rather talk to you all in person. And that announcement from the government late last year, after years of advocacy in this space, is a glimmer of hope that we're moving in the right direction, and it's a demonstration of the work that the community has put into this space, that the power of community that has been harnessed through this one program. This is just one example, but hopefully it has trickle effects on the parts of the policy spectrum as well. The more we can demonstrate that the community is really invested in this space, the more of a say and influence we have in shaping policies and shaping decisions of our decision makers. So if at a local level communities are really interested, those I think we actually have a mentor group in our group mentorship program from the St. Benedict's Church down there, sharing stories of the work that you are doing with policymakers is incredibly important, and it shows that you're not just talking about the issue, that you're really doing the work on the ground as well, and coming to them with solutions and putting forward those solutions, and not just blaming them for all the wrongdoings and the build-up of the policy changes over the years. So for those of you interested, I'll put in a link to our group mentorship program in the chat here. Nicole Watkins is in the room there with you, who can share some of those flyers of how you can get involved in the group mentorship program. We have about 93 mentor groups across the country right now. It was meant to be a pilot to test the model of sponsorship during the pandemic when international borders were shut. We started with only recruiting and training 20 groups in 2020 to now having 93 groups across the country, and working with over 800 volunteers involved in this space. We've especially in the wake of the crisis in Afghanistan with the arrival, this has been a real example of how the community has stepped up and shown the government that, or policymakers that we can shoulder this and we can work with you to make sure everything works well, especially when, you know, all settlement agencies were struggling quite a bit after the pandemic, and having had to downsize because no one was coming into the country to then have to respond so rapidly to an influx of new arrivals. So that real partnership between community and settlement services and government has been quite significant in this space. You know, we have about 105 adults as mentees, we call them mentees, in the program right now, and over 150 children, all kinds of households, new arrivals, or, you know, those who have arrived earlier in after the pandemic. The main principle of our work really is that community is the expert in this space. They know they're the expert in their own local communities, and they need to be trusted to be doing this work. We're here to support as much as we can, and it's a group volunteering experience. So it's not, you know, on one person's responsibility to be the main to solve all the problems. It's everyone in a community, in a local community, comes around a common purpose and shares this common purpose. I'll stop there. I don't want to go too much over time. If there are any questions, happy to take.
Thank you so much, Shabnam. There's a lot of information there to take on board, and it's good that we've got Nicole in the room here who can follow up with local people. And of course, I know Shabnam and Nicole will be available for questions and through the links, the various links that we'll share in our follow-up email to make sure you can make contact. The End Child Detention Coalition is really behind CRISA. We believe it's a very strong model to build these harmonious communities that we wanted to see. And so we're promoting it very much through our networks and very involved ourselves. As one of our purposes is to support newly arrived families and children with the End Child Detention Coalition. So if there's any questions in the chat or anyone from the room would like to ask a question, just let me know. But I wanted to ask Shabnam, whether you feel that, because one of the issues that and the challenges that we have in this space is to get to people who are, you might call them the unconverted, the people who are not in this conversation, are not in this dialogue, you know, have not met, as you referred to, have not met somebody from a refugee background. It's very hard to reach them with this story. Do you find that the CRISA scheme actually reaches beyond the usual people who are involved or interested in this issue?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I have to go on mute.
But yes, absolutely. We have a very diverse cohort of volunteers who've put their hand up to be doing this work, and it has diversified even more in the aftermath of the crisis in Afghanistan, and that you know, overwhelming show of solidarity across Australian communities. You know, we've had the veteran community come up and come together and start mentor groups, for example. You know, we have the churches coming together. We have the private sector who's put in who's quite invested in this space too, because there's been a huge awareness that, you know, this is something that we should all be getting behind, but also this is something that everybody can do, and even if it's just that one person in the group who is really invested, who's, you know, the converted, and others are a little over on the fence, seeing that one person or one or two people in the group and their passion and dipping your toes in the water a little bit without being pushed into the deep end is quite encouraging for people to understand, and knowing that, you know, it's actually not that that big a deal, and it's incredibly rewarding to be involved in creating positive outcomes for people who are just like your family members, who are just like your friends, who you may have had very different perspectives towards before joining the program. And as Craig said earlier, it's it makes you question next time a narrative like that is pushed out, whether in media or by policymakers. It does make you question, no, that's not really the case. That's not the kind of people that I know.
Yeah, very much so. It really gives you that grassroots perspective, and it enables you to challenge the I guess the narrative that is being directed by media often.